There is a house in East Hampton, New York, that the world discovered in 1975. It was a 28-room mansion on 6 acres in one of the most expensive zip codes in America. When the documentary filmmakers Albert and David Maysles entered it for the first time, they found something that East Hampton had been trying to pretend did not exist for years. The house was buried, not in debris, in life. Raccoons lived in the walls. Cats lived everywhere else. Estimated at anywhere between 5 and 50 cats. Nobody had counted recently. Fleas had colonized the lower floors. The roof had been deteriorating for 20 years. Rain came through in multiple rooms. The garden had not been tended in decades. What had been one of the finest private gardens on the East Coast had become a wilderness of vines and overgrowth so dense that the house was barely visible from the street. Inside, in the upstairs bedroom, surrounded by photographs of her former life, lived a 79-year-old woman named Edith Bouvier Beale. She was the aunt of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She was the former social queen of East Hampton society. She had once been one of the most glamorous women in New York. She had not left the property in years. Her daughter Edith, known as Little Edie, was 57 years old and living in the same house. Little Edie had been a fashion model. She had been a cabaret performer. She had been engaged to Joseph Kennedy Jr. before his death in the war. She had given up her life in New York to come home and care for her mother. She had been here for 24 years. She was not leaving. Neither of them was leaving. And the world, when the documentary was released, could not look away. The story of Grey Gardens begins not in 1975, but in 1917. That was the year Phelan Beale married Edith Bouvier. Phelan Beale was a prominent lawyer. Edith Bouvier was the daughter of Major John Vernon Bouvier II, a man of social distinction if not substantial fortune. She was also the sister of John Vernon Bouvier III, who would later become the father of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. The Beales were a couple of the kind that East Hampton society celebrated. Well-connected, attractive, socially adept. Phelan bought the property on West End Avenue in East Hampton in 1923. The house had been built in 1907. It was substantial without being ostentatious. 28 rooms set on a large plot with a garden that the previous owners had begun, and the Beales would transform into something remarkable. Edith Beale threw herself into the garden with the same intensity she brought to everything. She studied horticulture. She hired gardeners. She designed the plantings herself. The Grey Gardens, named by the Beales for the grey-shingled house and the grey-leaved plants she favored, became one of the most admired private gardens in the Hamptons. Social columns covered it. Visitors came to see it. Edith Beale was, in the 1930s and early 1940s, exactly what she appeared to be. The accomplished mistress of a beautiful property in the most fashionable summer colony in America. Then Phelan left. Phelan Beale filed for divorce in 1946. The marriage had been deteriorating for years. The precise reasons are private. What is documented is the result. Edith Beale was left with the house, limited alimony, and 5 children, the youngest of whom was 12 years old. She was 50 years old. She had spent her adult life as a society hostess. She had no professional training. She had no income beyond the alimony. The alimony was not sufficient to maintain the property. But Edith Beale did not sell the property. She did not downsize. She stayed. She reduced the staff. Then she reduced it further. Then she let the garden go. She could not maintain it without gardeners, and she could not afford the gardeners. So the garden she had spent 20 years building began its slow return to wilderness. Little Edie's story intersects here in the way that the stories of mothers and daughters always intersect. Badly. Edith Bouvier Beale, known as Little Edie to distinguish her from her mother, was born in 1917. She was beautiful, vivacious, talented. She had her mother's theatrical quality and her father's social confidence. In the 1940s, she was living in New York, modeling, performing in cabaret, moving in circles that included the most glamorous people in the city. She was engaged to Joseph Kennedy Jr. When Kennedy was killed in action in August 1944, the engagement ended. She did not recover easily. She continued in New York for years afterward. But in 1952, she came home to East Hampton to help her mother, to stay for a while. A while became a year. A year became 5 years. 5 years became 20. The mechanism by which Little Edie became trapped at Grey Gardens is not simple. It is not the story that the documentary told. The documentary told a story of two eccentric women living in glorious squalor, performing for each other and for the camera, their relationship a dance of love and resentment that was painful and funny and impossible to look away from. That story is true, but it is not the whole story. The whole story involves a system. The Bouvier family name carried enormous social weight. It carried less actual financial weight than appearances suggested. When Felin Beale left, the financial infrastructure that had supported the Grey Gardens property left with him. Edith could not maintain the house. She could not afford to sell it at a price that would have actually allowed her to live elsewhere with any comfort. She was caught. The house was too large to maintain and too valuable to abandon. So she stayed, and the house deteriorated around her. And her daughter stayed to help. And the deterioration continued. The neighbors knew. East Hampton knew. The town had been aware of the condition of the Grey Gardens property for years before the documentary was made. What the town did not do was help. What the town did in 1971 was threaten. The Suffolk County Health Department cited the property for health code violations. The violations were genuine. The house was in a condition that posed genuine health hazards. The health department threatened to condemn the property and force the Beales out. The Beales had nowhere to go. And then, in an intervention that changed the story and probably saved the Beales' lives, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis stepped in. Jackie Kennedy was the most famous woman in America in 1971. She was also, it should be noted, the niece of Big Eddie and the cousin of Little Edie. She had been aware of the situation at Grey Gardens for years. She had, by some accounts, been sending money. When the condemnation notice arrived, she acted directly. She hired contractors. She paid for repairs to the roof and the plumbing. She paid for a partial cleanup of the property. The repairs were sufficient to satisfy the health department. The Beales were allowed to stay. Jackie Kennedy did not publicize this. She did not seek credit for it. She simply made the calls and wrote the checks, and the problem was addressed. The documentary filmmakers arrived 3 years later. They found the property in better condition than it had been before Jackie's intervention. Still extraordinary by any ordinary standard. Still buried under decades of accumulated disorder. But no longer under imminent threat of condemnation. The documentary Grey Gardens was released in 1975. It was unlike anything American audiences had seen. Two women in a deteriorating mansion, their relationship a continuous performance of love and blame and memory and fantasy. Big Eddie singing, Little Edie dancing, both of them addressing the camera with a directness that felt simultaneously intimate and theatrical. The film became a cult classic. Then it became a classic. Then it became the subject of a Broadway musical and an HBO film, and an ongoing cultural conversation about what it means to be a woman trapped by the expectations of her class and her family. Little Edie became a fashion icon. Her improvisational outfits, skirts worn as headdresses, sweaters pinned in unexpected configurations, were cited by fashion designers for decades. She had invented something. She had not invented it on purpose. She had invented it because her access to proper clothing had been limited and her creativity was inexhaustible. Big Eddie died in 1977. She was 82 years old. She died in the house where she had lived for 50 years, in the upstairs bedroom where the documentary had found her, surrounded by the photographs of the life she had lived before the garden went wild and the roof started leaking, and the cats came, and the raccoons came, and the world outside the gate became something she no longer recognized. Little Edie sold the property in 1979 for $220,000. She moved to Florida. She performed in a one-woman cabaret show. She was 62 years old, and she was finally doing what she had wanted to do when she left East Hampton for New York in the 1940s. She was performing. The life she had put on hold for 24 years was available again. She died in 2002. She was 84 years old. The Grey Gardens property was purchased by a Washington Post executive named Ben Bradley and his wife Sally Quinn. They restored it. They repaired the roof properly. They hired gardeners. They brought the garden back. Or they brought something back. What they brought back was a garden. What they could not bring back was the specific garden that Edith Beale had designed and built and abandoned. That garden was gone. It had been gone since 1946. What grew in its place for 30 years was something else. Something that the Beales brothers filmed and the world found beautiful and haunting. It was beautiful. It was not what Edith Beale had planted. The cruel question at the center of the Grey Garden story is this. A woman spent 20 years building something beautiful. Her husband left. Her income was reduced to a level that made maintaining what she had built impossible. She stayed anyway. Her daughter came to help and stayed for 24 years. The neighborhood knew, the town knew, the family knew. The intervention that saved them came from the most famous woman in America, who happened to be family, who made the calls and wrote the checks without any publicity. Without Jackie Kennedy's intervention, the Beales would have been forced from the property in 1971. The documentary would never have been made. Little Edie would never have become a fashion icon. Grey Gardens would never have become a cultural touchstone. It would have been another story of an elderly woman displaced from a deteriorating property by a county health department. The beauty of the story that exists depends entirely on the intervention that prevented the story from ending badly. And the intervention came from money. As it always does. As it always has. The house is still there. It has been restored. It is beautiful again. The garden is tended. The raccoons are gone. The cats are gone. The photographs of Big Eddie's former life are gone. What remains is a very expensive house in East Hampton that is indistinguishable from the other very expensive houses in East Hampton. Except for what happened inside it. Except for what the Beales brothers found when they walked through the door. Except for the story that the house cannot stop telling. Did you know the full story of Grey Gardens before today? Tell me in the comments what you think Little Edie gave up to stay.